Carbon credit contract lengths make no goddamn sense. And I'm not just talking about the obvious, but let's go ahead and start with the obvious, which is that if you're buying carbon credits, there are carbon projects that last for 30 years, for 20 years, and then there are carbon projects that last for 100 years. And, well, obviously the two are not equal. If you buy a 20-year carbon project, it's not the same as buying a 100-year carbon project. This should be obvious. In fact, some of the early 20-year carbon projects that are on Verra's platform that are about 15 plus years old now, some of them are actually very good, but they're coming to an end worryingly soon, and I have no idea what's going to happen to those forests. But this video isn't about that, because there's already a solution to that problem, which is called ton-year accounting. And I've already made 2 videos about ton-year accounting, but the quick explainer is that, scientifically speaking, we can use the decay rate of CO2 that we observe from the atmosphere to compute what the long-term value is of short-term credits. So we can take that 30-year Verra project and we can say this is what the actual 100-year value is. And we should be doing that for all carbon projects. I mean, my company has started doing that for all the projects that we review. But if you're buying carbon projects from a 30-year project and you want it to have a 100-year impact, you should be doing ton-year accounting, and you should be buying probably about 3 times as many as you are. So that's the thing. I encourage everyone to be using ton-year accounting to set these different contract lengths to a standard, probably 100 years. But this video is not about that. This video is about the actual ecological and sociological implications of having these contract lengths that are so different. And let me start with the less obvious contract length, which is that 100-year-long projects, like the ones that you see with the California Air Resource Board forestry projects, they're awful. And the reason that 100-year-long projects are awful is that nobody's going to sign that contract. Nobody in their right mind is ever going to sign away 100 years worth of their land, giving up their timber rights for themselves and the next generation and the next generation. 4 or 5 generations down the line, you're giving up your timber rights and you're still having to pay taxes on that land. I own land. I own forests. I would never enroll it for a 100-year carbon project. So that's the natural reaction anyone would have. And even from a financial point of view, it doesn't make much sense to do this. When you enroll for CARB 100-year projects today, you get a big payment of credits up front, and then you don't get much else after that. You get the growth of the forest after that, which is small relative to the upfront payment. And even if you believe that carbon credits are really, going to be important in the future and stuff, it oftentimes makes more sense to wait rather than enroll for the 100-year project right now. Why not wait 10 years? Maybe carbon credits will be selling for more by then. So there's never a scenario where signing a 100-year contract is a very smart idea from like a conservation or forest management perspective, if you actually intend on doing good. And here's the problem, which is that because 100-year contracts make no sense to anybody, very few people are actually signing those contracts. And the people who do sign up for that are generally people who are either conserving the forest to begin with. So, we've got our classic group of the Nature Conservancy registering parks for these programs when obviously the parks weren't at any risk and they shouldn't be getting credits for that. People who were really never going to be able to harvest these trees. So we've got classic instances of gerrymandering where they're only enrolling the little squiggly bits that they never would have been able to actually harvest. Or people who were basically already doing this. So, because of other flaws in the methodology, people are signing these 100-year contracts because it's basically the same type of management that they were doing anyway. So they're not really improving upon anything. And so as a result of 100-year contracts, a large portion of the people who have actually signed these things are bad actors. They're not actually improving upon forest management. And let's think about it from another perspective here, which is that, solving climate change is going to be hard. And we really need a lot of people involved in these programs in order to make a difference. A couple forests here and a couple forests there, signing 100-year contracts is not going to do anything for anybody. If you tally up all of the carbon projects that I'm aware of, you get to a number of around 700. So there are 700 nature-based carbon projects worldwide that I know of. 700 across the entire planet. Now, there's 15 million forest landowners in the United States alone. Never mind Canada, never mind Brazil, never mind all these other countries that have tons and tons of little forest landowners. So out of 15 million, The entire world hasn't even managed to enroll more than 700 of these forests. And the primary reason behind that is because nobody in their right mind is going to sign that contract. Okay, so 100-year contracts suck, and they lead to projects that are not additional. All right, let's look at the opposite. We often see projects that are 20 to 30 years long. Well, they almost have the exact same problem, which is that a lot of the times they're sponsoring forests that were always going to grow back during that period. So, we see a lot of carbon projects that are planting trees, for example, and have a 30-year length. Well, guess what? The trees that they're planting reach merchantable age at year 30, and the people who are planting them are timber companies. So timber companies are just being subsidized to plant the crops that they always would have and wait the same period of time that they always would have. And all of a sudden, the project isn't justified. So a huge number of projects that have like 30-year value to them have no value at all, because that's just how long the trees are going to take to grow. And this really gets to the crux of the issue here, which is that a 30-year project in one forest is not the same as a 30-year project in another. Let's take a look at the forest just outside this lovely, dimly lit back room. The forests around me have an average rotation age of about 50 years. So if you're enrolling a 60-year-old Doug fir forest for just a 10-year project, you're doing a lot of good. You're taking a forest that was undoubtedly at risk. People really want to cut that thing down because there's a lot of valuable wood in there, and you're preserving it. Even if it's for a short time, you can compute the long-term value of that with 10-year accounting, and you're actually keeping those trees safe. But let's imagine another scenario where the forest is only, 20 years old. So if you've got a 20-year-old Douglas fir forest that's going to reach biological maturity by age 50, you do not want to be having a 30-year project there. You're not doing any good whatsoever in incentivizing people to hold on to those trees for 30 years, because they were always going to hold on to those trees for 30 years. And so there's this disconnect here where we think that like the length of the contract has anything to do with the biology or like the impact on the environment, but it really almost doesn't. And the exact same thing happens with planting trees, right? So for example, in the southeastern United States, 30 years is typically the time it takes for pine trees to get to merchantable size and get cut down. Well, under Verra's current new ARR protocol, you can cut down all your pine trees, plant new ones, enroll for carbon credits, wait 30 years, and cut them down again and get carbon credits for that. Now, people have been doing this for hundreds of years. So the idea that we should be somehow sponsoring this with carbon credits is absurd. But, if you sign a 30-year contract for a reforestation of pine trees, that's essentially what you're getting. And your credits are worthless, to be clear. And that kind of represents a large majority of Verra's offsets right now in the reforestation space. If you actually dig into the actual projects, you'll find that most of Verra's ARR projects being planted by timber companies, they reach financial maturity at the end of the project. And so you're not doing anything for anybody right there. So this is obviously a real problem with both reforestation and improved forest management project types. And in case it's not obvious here, the problem is additionality, which is that basically projects that are less than the length that it takes the trees to grow aren't justified in existing at all. Or projects that are super, super long that are never commercially viable and not even worth, the taxes that it's going to cost to keep that land around also are not justifiable. But fortunately, there is a solution here, and it's actually fairly obvious, which is that contract lengths should vary by biological rotation age. So we should not be afraid of 10-year projects if we're actually conserving a 60-year-old Douglas fir stand for an extra 10 years. That's exactly what we want to do. But a 10-year project for a young set of trees is worthless. So what we should really be doing is we should be identifying the biological rotation age of each of these forests, and then we should be saying, all right, you are likely to harvest your trees in 2030. Protect them until 2040. We should be extending the length of these contracts by some period of time, maybe 10 years beyond the biological rotation age, in order to have an actual impact on the climate. And this goes for both ARR and for IFM types of projects. If we make contracts variable so that you're basically just protecting the trees longer than would be commercially viable to harvest them, and if we combine that with 10-year accounting so that we can actually compute like the 100-year value of a 30-year project, then we've created the perfect credits. We've created a system in which like small landowners and forest owners actually want to enroll to actually improve their forest management. We're not going to have these unjustifiable carbon projects that are 100-year long and not actually protecting anything. And we've kind of set all the carbon credits equal to each other. So all the credits have basically the same value, even if they're coming from short project lengths. So that's the ideal. And I've talked to several registries about this idea, and I think that people kind of generally agree that this is what we should be doing. But certainly in the conversations I've had, there hasn't been much acceptance of this idea. And I think the reason for that is that people don't want to rock the boat. People don't want to go out there and say that, okay, this 10-year project, it may not be 100 years, but it's doing a lot more for the climate than the 100-year project next door to it, because it's actually protecting mature trees that were at risk. So I think we have the solution here, and I think that it could even be done in a very automated way, where you could, for example, use remote sensing to identify how close trees are to their biological rotation age, and then settle on what the contract length should be. But I think another problem is that increasingly we see regulatory agencies like the ICVCM going out there saying that carbon projects should just be 40 years long. So that's the ICVCM standard, and it doesn't make any distinctions about whether or not that project is taking place in Alaska, where it's going to take 80 years for the trees to reach biological rotation age, or in Brazil, where it's only going to take 20. They just say 40 years. And I think that gets into a greater concern that I have in the industry about, potentially these attempts to regulate it kind of squashing any attempts to make things better. But anyway, that's a darker path to be taken on a less informative and far more ranty video. Keep your mind open to carbon project lengths that are unconventional. And one of the biggest keys to figuring out whether or not carbon credits are good is to figure out whether or not the contract exceeds the length of the biological rotation age.